He then kind of pitched his book, and I went and bought a copy of his book. And I thought, boy, this would be a pretty interesting program for Cattleman's Day. So I called him, and he said he'd be happy to come out. And before I kind of give you his biography, I want to read you just a little piece from the inside front part of his book. And this is what it says. There's a whole new world of global warming science today, but few people hear about it. In recent years, an internally consistent body of scientific literature has emerged that argues cogently for global warming, but against the gloom and doom vision of climate change. But those who merely call attention to this literature are intimidated, blacklisted, and even driven from prestigious scientific employment. Calling the current scientific environment a climate of extremes is an understatement. It's a fact that there are fewer citations in the refereed scientific literature providing evidence for the moderate view of global warming, but that's to be expected. In Climate of Extremes, climatologists Patrick Michaels and Robert Balding explain that climate science is hardly unbiased, even though the global climate community itself believes that any new finding has an equal probability of making our climatic future appear more or less dire. Patrick Michaels is a distinguished senior fellow in the School of Public Policy at George Mason University and a senior fellow in environmental studies at the Cato Institute in Washington, D.C. Dr. Michaels was a professor of environmental sciences at University of Virginia for 30 years and was president of the American Association of State Climatologists and program chair for the Committee on Applied Climatology of the American Meteorological Society. He has published several books and has a lengthy list of professional and popular articles on climate change and its effect on economies. He is an active member of the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which was awarded the Nobel Prize in 2007. Dr. Michaels, PhD, was from the University of Wisconsin and was titled Atmospheric Anomalies and Crop Yields in North America. So he has a history and connection with agriculture. He's been a keen observer of American agriculture since being granted that degree in 1979. And the only thing that I didn't see when I watched him on C-SPAN is I didn't actually see green tennis shoes on C-SPAN. But anyway, Dr. Michaels, we're delighted to have you with us today, and we look forward to your presentation.
Hold on, a little experiment. This thing is very, very loud. Let me take this down a bit. We okay? No. I'm going to stand over here. Just turn that one on. I don't know why I did that.
Do you want to use the...
I'll stand here.
Okay.
There. Okay, I hate standing in one place to give a talk, but I guess I have to. Anyway, there are lots of things that are being done in Washington, D.C. that you need to be aware of. You need to be not only aware of climate change, but climate change legislation. And I would like to talk to you first for a few minutes about this bill that's called the Waxman Markey Cap and Trade Bill. It passed late in the afternoon on June 26th of last year, so the congressmen could get home to their 4th of July recess, and when they got home, they experienced the first raucous town hall meetings. Those meetings were not against health care, they were against cap and trade. It requires emissions to be at 2005 levels for carbon dioxide in 2012, 16% below that in 2020, 42 in 2030, 83% below 2005 levels. It works by something called cap and trade. And I'll explain how cap and trade works for agriculture. It's really quite simple. This is a cow. You see? It emits methane. And what we do is you are given a certain allotment of cows to produce a certain amount of methane. But that allotment of methane that you can emit from your operation is ratcheted down. Here's your initial number of cows that have been capped, and eventually you trade these back and forth. You see a guy who cannot get his emissions down from his operation can buy from somebody who has a lot more permits to sell, and because we're eventually ratcheting down the number of cows, this is the ultimate result of cap and trade. Be very careful. Be very afraid, because in fact that is the reality of this. Now, how guilty are you of all this stuff? I bet this thing walks. There we go. How guilty are you of raising the methane concentration of the atmosphere? That's quite all right. Here are the sources of methane in our atmosphere, okay? The major source, methane is a greenhouse gas. It absorbs infrared radiation coming from the surface of the Earth, and as a result raises the surface temperature some. The main sources are bovine flatulence. I don't think the number of cows in the world is going to go down, as we saw in the previous talk. Rice paddy agriculture, that's something that's not going to go away. Coal mining continues, but the major source, in fact, is bovine flatulence. So if there were this terrible methane problem, methane in the atmosphere should be going up. After all, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, of which I am a member, insisted when we began working 20 years ago that methane was going up and would go up in the atmosphere at a constant rate. And let us just take a look and see what has happened. Here are the projections from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. I will say on that panel that my being on that panel is proof that all garden parties need a skunk. This is the range of projection for methane from when they began to make projections around the year 1998 or so. And this is the observed change in atmospheric methane. It's not behaving according to projections. Next time your congressman comes by, if he knows anybody who voted for cap and trade, why don't you point out that methane, the second most important greenhouse gas, warming gas, the one that you are supposedly responsible for, is not increasing in the atmosphere like it was supposed to. So why should you be regulated? Now let's take a closer look at methane history. And what you actually see in some recent years is the concentration has actually gotten below zero in certain years. Now, why aren't your congressmen aware of this? Well, they are aware of it, but they might not like to hear about it. So what you need to do is you need to tell them about it. Now, what about this Waxman-Markey bill? These are the per capita emissions of carbon dioxide, the major greenhouse gas, that have occurred for United States citizens. You can see it goes up to about 10 metric tons per person or something like that per year around the year 2000. Here it is in 2005. Here's what we are in 2009. There are these 2030, 2040, and 2050. This bill mandates that the carbon dioxide emissions of you, and you in the year 2050, which is 39 years from now, be the average carbon dioxide emissions from somebody at the end of the Civil War. Now, how are we going to do this? Well, one of the things is that it's very clearly related to economic activity. Oh, we will get to the 2005 level by 2012 very easily. These are carbon dioxide emissions. There's 2005. What happened in 2008 and 2009? The economy went in the tank. And so in mere 2 years from now, we will certainly be down here somewhere, and all the environmentalists will say, see, it was easy. Yeah, all we needed was 10% unemployment. No problem whatsoever. Now, what do you get for all this? Let's suppose that the country adopts this Waxman-Markey thing. If we did nothing, according to the United Nations computer models, the temperature would rise 1.5 degrees Celsius globally by the year 2050. If the United States did Waxman-Markey and the U.S. only, it would rise by 1.54 degrees. By the way, I'll show you later that these models are not right. And then if all the nations of the world that had obligations under the Kyoto Protocol, Japan, the European community, if they all adopted this crazy 83% reduction in emissions, the temperature would rise 1.5 degrees. So you'd save a total of 0.08 of a degree. Why? Because of the earlier slide that we saw. The emissions in China and India are growing rapidly, and there is no way that they are going to cut them. So all we are doing is committing economic suicide, okay? Just let your representatives know that you know this. Now, we can look on out to the year 2100 if you think it's going to make that much difference by then. This, again, is using the United Nations computer models. I'll show what's wrong with those in a bit. But if we don't do anything, our average temperature of the globe rises 2.95 degrees Celsius. Waxman Markey here in the U.S. only 2.84. Waxman Markey, all the Kyoto countries of the world, 2.7 degrees. So what do you get for this? No real change in the warming trajectory that the planet is on. Now, you might say this is pretty not so bad. After all, we do have cost estimates of this. You know what the object of being on television is? The object of being on television is to get your opponent to do this, to go, And the way you get the opponent to do that is to ask the following question on global warming. Oh, I see you want to reduce emissions 83% by the year 2050. That's 39 years from today. Could you please tell me exactly what you're going to do that? So that's why I can't give you a price, because nobody knows how to do it. It's this magic wand that's been waved in Washington, D.C. And because nobody knows how to do it, we don't know how expensive it is, but I will leave you with a little bit. And last time gasoline got to $4 a gallon, which was when corn price was also spiking because we are the first nation in the world to decide to burn up our food supply in the name of political correctness, unfortunately. You know, you shouldn't be laughing, you should be crying. That's the amazing thing about all this. Well, anyway, the last time gasoline got to $4 a gallon, we reduced our consumption a grand total of 4%. So how high do you think it has to be to reduce our consumption by 83%? Oh, the economists say we'll just all drive Priuses. Well, let me tell you about that Prius. That Prius is a new car. The one that it replaced did not go to the junkyard. It went down the socioeconomic ladder. It raises emissions, okay? Every new car raises emissions. You're not going to reduce emissions with hybrid cars. You're not going to reduce emissions with funny light bulbs, 83%. Nobody knows how to do it. And so the Senate, being somewhat more reasonable, apparently, has decided that it doesn't want to touch this cap and trade. Well, unless you're Lindsey Graham, who is a Republican from South Carolina who has decided he's going to sell nuclear power. And when that gets back to the House, the radicals in the House will never buy that. And so there was a wonderful new proposal that came out yesterday. I hope all of you saw it. Carbon tax, energy tax. I hope you like that. No new taxes. Well, by the way, in Washington, I have never seen the politics of suicide before, where people will vote on things that they know will not get them elected. Did you think the Founding Fathers thought that we will elect people who will vote for things that the people don't want? But that's what's happening today. I have never seen it before. I hope to never see it again. So now EPA gets to regulate. And here EPA has to jump through some legal hoops. They have to declare carbon dioxide an endangerment. So this is from their endangerment finding on December 7th, 2009. I want you to read this carefully. Most of the observed increases in global average temperature since the mid-1920s is very likely due to the observed increase in anthropogenic greenhouse gas concentrations. Very likely is defined as a 90 to 99% probability. So they're saying most of the temperature rise since 1950 is a result of changes in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And this quote basically comes from the last report of the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a highly politicized organization. You've been watching the news. I know you go online. You see the mistakes that were made on the Himalayan glaciers. You see the mistakes that were made. There are mistakes made on U.S. crop yields, by the way, that were made all over this report. Those mistakes were not accidental, nor were they a result of stupidity. Anyway, but this is the driving statement. It says that most of the warming of the last, since 1950, is a result of greenhouse gas changes. And here's the temperature history from the University of East Anglia, the home of Climategate, from 1950 to now. And it shows a total rise of 0.7 degrees Celsius from 1950 to now. You notice that the rise is very linear, by the way. That's a very interesting thing, which we'll get to later. It has quite a bit of importance. Anybody who says that temperature is rising at an increasing rate, that's an exponent. No, it's rising at a constant rate. Every one of those news stories that you read that says temperature is going up at an increasing rate happens to be wrong. Anyway, the problem is that new research since the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change came out begins to question exactly how much warming there has been. This is from a paper by Thompson et al., 2008, where they discovered that the sea surface temperatures, remember that's 70% of the planet, were put in as too cold in the or in the mid portion of the 20th century. This, by the way, the last author on this is none other than the famous Phil Jones, who was the head of Climategate. And in the Climategate emails, they talk about when they're going to adjust the temperature history. They were very reluctant to do it. Why didn't they do it as soon as they found it out? Because it reduced the warming from 0.7 degrees down to 0.55 degrees. So that simple change means the adjusted temperature rises 79% of the observed. Any of you have a weather station? I know you got Davis Digitar. I love those things on your farms and your operations. You notice that they're painted white or they're white plastic. All weather stations around the planet are white, a certain shade of white, because if they get dark or they get dust on them, radiation is absorbed and the temperature artificially rises. Now, Ross McKittrick and I did a study published in the Journal of Geophysics Atmospheres in which we looked at this kind of phenomenon. May I ask you a question? In the country of Chad, how high do you think it is up on the economic totem pole to paint the weather station? Not very. And so the poorer the country is, the more artificial warming it shows when compared to satellite records. And it turns out that the land-based records may have about twice as much warming in them as is really in them. Now, land is only 30% of the Earth's surface, and you can't have this problem on board a ship. Howsoever, you can adjust the temperature history for that, and now you're down to 67% of the observed value. This is adjusted for sea surface temperature and the non-climatic signal. 2 months ago, in the journal, I believe it was Nature, Susan Solomon from the National Academy said, you know, it really hasn't warmed for the last 12 to 15 years. Thank you very much for somebody finally acknowledging that. And the reason is because in the stratosphere, up above the surface, and in the troposphere, high, about 40,000 feet on up, water vapor has been declining. Never mind that climate models tell us water vapor should be increasing in those areas. And that water vapor is a greenhouse gas, and so because it's declining up there, the temperature is not rising at the rate it should be rising. And that adjusts the temperature down even further. That's now the blue curve. The red curve is the original one that started out at 0.72 degrees, 702 degrees. We're now at 50% of the observed. Okay? Ramanathan at Stanford said, oh, there's another component to the warming that's not greenhouse gases. It's black dust that is ejected into the atmosphere, particularly in Eurasia. If you go to Eurasia, you see something called the brown cloud. And there's a lot of deflation, DEFLATION, of the soil, and there's a lot of pollution control that's not put on, a lot of smokestacks, and that reduces the warming to 0.44, or 40% of the observed. We're now down to 3.306 degrees, possibly caused by greenhouse effect changes. Now everybody's going, wait a minute, what about the sun? I hear the sun has something to do with warming. Well, it does. It doesn't have as much to do with it as, I think it doesn't have as much to do with it as some people say, but Nicola Scafetta at Duke University has a whole range of values for the solar influence on this temperature, and we'll plug that one in. And now we're down to 0.204 degrees. So, now wait a second, you're saying, Michaels, you're cherry picking the data. There's got to be a bunch of papers that say that there's more warming in the record than is being observed. No. N-O. They're all in this direction. So, I have to say something. The EPA is wrong. Most of the warming is not very likely a result of changes in greenhouse gases. I was involved in 215 single-space pages of a petition to get them to reopen their finding of endangerment. And the rumor mill flying around Washington is they're going to have to reopen it. If that's the case, you may have been saved from a problem, because the EPA is only going to do something extreme as long as there is extremism at the top end of the administration. And I have a feeling that that may not last all that long. Anyway, what is the urgency of all this? Thank you. Go to those town hall meetings, okay? What is the urgency of all this at any rate? Here's the history. Here are the climate models for what's called the mid-range emission scenario, CO2 changes, for the 21st century from the United Nations. Each colored piece of spaghetti is a different climate model. The dotted line in the middle is constant. Hey, do you remember I said something a little earlier before you got really bored, which was, notice that the temperature is rising at a constant rate, not an increasing rate? That's also what our computer models project. They don't project a wild exponential warming unless they're fed huge, huge amounts of carbon dioxide that we can't emit. In the mid-range emission scenarios, they're all constant rates. Now, I have a stupid question. If you have computer forecasts giving you different rates of warming, how do you decide which one is correct? Well, you decide the same way you decide. We have about 4 or 5 weather forecasting models, and the wonderful winter that we've been having in Washington, D.C., which is equivalent to the North Pole. You don't understand. We have 55 inches of snow this year. Dulles Airport, the little west of town, is running about 75 inches. Even by standards in the Midwest, that is pretty dang high for a given season. Anyway, these computer models, we have computer models that forecast the snow. And someday it might say, oh, it's going to rain from this storm, or this one's going to go too far east. I used to teach weather forecasting at University of Virginia. When your computer models say different things, what do you think you tell the students to do? Look out the window, okay? Honest, this is not rocket science, okay? What you do, the window happens to be what the weather's doing now, which model says the weather now is what's happening, and number 2, what this computer model did the last time there was a similar situation to this one. Fine. Look out the window, Jack. You have a warming. It's a straight line. These say it's supposed to be straight lines. So how does that warming comport to these straight lines? Gee, that was a difficult exercise. And so what you can see is the observed or projected warming for the 21st century runs out to about 1.6 degrees Celsius or something like that. We had a little bit under 1 degree in the previous century. The warming of the early 20th century didn't have very much to do with greenhouse gases. But as Ted showed in his first talk, a funny thing happened on the way through that warming. Corn yields sextupled. Wheat yields doubled. Life expectancy doubled. Per capita wealth in the industrialized world in real dollars went up by a factor of 10. That's when it warmed a degree. It's going to warm 1.6 degrees more, and that's all going to end, right? Sure. But there's a tipping point. I can see it here. You can't see anything. There's no such thing. So, one of the reasons that this is occurring, by the way, is the red line is the actual increases in atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration, the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. The blue line is the range projected by the United Nations, and you can see we're on the low end of that. It is not the end of the world, all right? But in Washington, it always is the end of the world because we need this from you, and you're not going to give us this from you unless we have convinced you that you are going to die if you don't. Just remember that. It's not just with climate change, it's with other issues, but climate change is especially egregious. What do you get for all that warming and carbon dioxide you're putting in the atmosphere? Hey, you remember the equations of photosynthesis? They make you go through the Kelvin cycle here at K-State. What a wonder. Let's do the high school one. CH2 plus H2O yields CH2O. You put more water in a warm atmosphere, or you put more carbon dioxide in a warm atmosphere, or you put both in a warmer atmosphere, and what do you get? A greener world. How shocking can that be? And so, here is the change in the growing season. Days per decade in the last half of the 20th century. Let's see. Out here in California, that's 5 days per decade. That's a growing season increase of 25 to 30 days. That's 4 weeks increase. What happens during those periods of time? You can grow longer period crops, crops that will yield more. Your pasture lasts longer, obviously. It's significant here in the lower Great Plains, not as much, about 2 days per decade, but that's still good for a week and a half or so, which is not inconsiderable. And of course, my ecologist friends tell me, oh, but you'll have more plant matter and that'll lead to more insects. Well, the last I heard on this planet, plant matter wins. That's why it's here. Okay? And the world is getting greener. Although this weird presentation from Mainini et al. In Nature in 1997, this is what's called the normal vegetation index. And even when it's red, it's increasing, okay? There are no decreases on this map. The planet is turning greener. Let's take a look at something else called the net index of primary productivity from Science in 2003. The greener it is, the greener it's getting. Oh my God, here's the tropical rainforest. I thought that was dying. Here is the changeover of tropical rainforest and the development of the cattle industry in Brazil. Yeah, the primary productivity is going to be less because we're turning it into meat, which is not green. And by the way, here is the southern Sahara Desert, which, as you know, is expanding, but it turns out is growing in the other direction. It is declining. It is getting greener. This is sub-Saharan Africa, overpopulation as a result of overgrazing as a result of overpopulation, so it becomes less green. But it's very clear from looking at this map that this is a greener world, and that's what's happening as you're putting CO2 in the air. So how much money do you want to pay to stop that? And how is it going to affect agriculture specifically? Well, here's a distribution of corn production around the United States. And you'll notice that it tends to center up here in the upper Midwest, where the August temperature runs between about 70 and 78 degrees on the average. That's average of daily high and low temperature. So, oh my God, if it got warmer, then that would not be very good for this. Well, you know, the nice thing about economics, it's not just a world of scarcity, it's a world of choice, it's a world of substitution. Let's take a look at the distribution of soybeans across the United States. Whoa! Soybeans grow everywhere from hot and ridiculously humid Mississippi Delta in very large numbers, all the way up to where the corn grows. This is now known as the corn and soybean belt, as opposed to the corn belt. If it got too hot, if corn became economically unviable because of increased moisture stress caused by heat, which is the main factor here, what do you think is going to happen? People are going to switch to soybeans. They'll switch more and more out to soybeans. And, you know, last I heard, the same people who brought you the notion that it's great to burn up our food supply, as long as you have a good lobby in Washington, D.C., are pretty good at doing things with soybeans. And so, consequently, you have more of a soybean-based feedstock than you have more of a corn-based feedstock. Oh, no, but it's going to get warmer and warmer and warmer, and we're not going to be able to grow even soybeans fine. You know that lots of the world functions on grain, sorghums, and millets. Here you are in the United States. We grow it here where it's very dry and very hot. What do you think will happen? Oh, look, there is some here in the Mississippi Valley. What do you think would happen if it really, really got hot? This would expand all over the map. Archer Daniels Midland would make ethanol out of sorghum, and there'd be food riots. What else is new? This is the summer temperature change, by the way, that I think you can look at for this region. Now, I did not take the United Nations computer model here. I took it and divided it by half, because the warming is obviously in half of what's going on. It's been doing that for 50 years. It's running beneath the forecast. So you get a warming in August, this is August actually, of about 3 degrees Fahrenheit on the average here. So it sends your climate down to where it is in North Texas. Now, I know there's an ambivalent relationship between here and North Texas because of that thing called Oklahoma. God knows what that is. But Oklahoma, the tornado and the Dust Bowl, what can I say? What a great place. And then, of course, you do all know what the N stands for on the football helmets of the people up here, right? Knowledge. Anyway. I thought y'all knew that down here. All right, the finish here, running well ahead of schedule because it has so little content in it. That's what I like about my talk. We'll talk a little bit about Climategate, one of the more interesting aspects of this. And I just wanted to show you, Mr. Gore, it was pretty cold this morning, by the way. You know what that means? He's here. You think I'm kidding? Hi, I'm Al Gore. I'm just like you, only better. And in my movie, when I take my hands like this, I'm exaggerating. Anyway, Climategate. Okay, Climategate. I want to show you how little the science is settled. Oh, he had a piece in the New York Times on Sunday. I presume that you were smart enough to stay away from it. There are people in the East who actually believe this newspaper is important. And he said, the best part, they can't get their cap and trade. Guys like me are driving them nuts. I drive a hybrid car, by the way, because the greenies will never blow one up. It's true. I'm not making this up. I am not making this up. Anyway, Gore actually said, the reason that we don't have cap and trade is because there's a well-funded conspiracy of bad people who are writing on the internet. And the decline of the legacy media allows these people to speak. In other words, the internet that he invented is coming back to bite him. Number two, and because we can't control the mainstream media, i.e. the government can't control the propaganda scheme, oh my God, we're having town hall meetings when a person says we are going to put in cap and trade in an agricultural community to fight global warming. You get mad. Good. Let's hear it for the internet. Now, I want to show you about how the science is settled. Ha, ha, ha. Here. This has to do with Climategate. I'll explain in a second. If you were a scientist in 1995, you would have three temperature histories to work with. The first one would be the blue temperature history, which is a surface record from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC record from the University of East Anglia. The green would be weather balloon temperatures measured between 5 and 30,000 feet in the atmosphere. That's in millibars, not feet. I don't mean to bore you. And the red would be satellite temperatures that began in 1979. One of the first things you would notice is that the red, this is 1995 now, shows no warming whatsoever. And in fact, if you compare that directly to the green over the period in which they're concurrent, that shows no warming whatsoever either. The blue line does show warming. Now, these are independent sources. The satellite was designed to measure global temperature. The blue line, the green lines were designed to, with calibrated instrumentation every day, the weather balloons go up to initialize the weather forecasting models, and the blue lines are mainly farmers taking the temperature and not dusting off their weather equipment, and cities have a way of growing up around their thermometers, creating the urban heat island effect. In Washington, D.C., it's really quite phenomenal. Washington National Airport runs a couple degrees more than Dulles Airport, and now Dulles has started to warm up as the government grows down the Dulles Access Highway thanks to the favorable tax policies of Virginia. I used to be Virginia State climatologist. I have to put that line in. But if you go down to Charlottesville, any of you know the University of Virginia? Nothing changes there, okay? If you've ever been there, the only thing that really changes is the LSI. That's the local snottiness index, which continues. That is increasing at an increasing rate. They've got so much of it, they export it to Duke. Well, anyway. Now, you're going to be a scientist 5 years later, and the blue record is going to get adjusted. You're not going to know how because it's not going to be in the literature. Now, the first change is not going to seem like much. But I want you to fix your eyes here on the beginning of the record here, 1950 to 1960. And I'm going to toggle back and forth. Oh, my God. The same data got colder. Yes, the same data got colder. And then it was decided that the tropical weather balloon records, the tropical green records, were not reliable because there was a lot of noise in the data. It bounced around a lot from reading to reading. And so we're going to throw out the average readings. Well, that just happens to be the place where it wasn't warming up very much because the air is already saturated, and so tropics won't warm as much as polar regions. And then it was decided that the weather balloons were drifting in their orbits and that they were slightly underestimating temperature as they went on with time. There were other reasons. At any rate, take a look at what happens to the temperature history now when you're a scientist in 2006. Look at all three of them at first. This is the same data, okay? Now, I have a long lecture on why there's pressure on scientists to make things look bad all the time, but I think you can figure it out. Because if we don't make it look bad all the time, well, we don't bring enough money into the dean at 6 years, and we get to have a real job. So anyway, now, I want you to watch the blue line again. The blue line on the left. Whoops. Okay, you're a scientist in 1995, blue line on the left, 2000. Whoa! How much more warming did we put into the same data? And so a colleague of mine, Warwick Hughes, wrote to Phil Jones, the head of the Climate Research Unit at the University of East Anglia, said, that was a neat trick. That was before we understood what the word trick meant, by the way. In the Climategate emails, there's something about the trick of hiding the decline in the tree ring temperatures. That was a neat trick. I'd like to know how it was done. So I'd like the raw data, if you don't mind. And Phil Jones wrote back to Warwick Hughes. We have 25 years or so invested in the work. Why should I make the data available to you when your aim is to try and find something wrong with it? Why don't we just stop doing science, folks? The name of the game in science is I get to see your homework, and I get to see if it's right or not. Don't go into science to be friends. Go into science to be challenged by people who probably aren't your friends. But you will advance knowledge. You don't advance knowledge by not letting data out. Well, it turns out this went on and on and on and on. And there were FOIA requests for the data, and Jones said, destroy your reviews of the IPCC report. I'm destroying mine. Please destroy yours. I sure hope these guys don't ever find out there's a FOIA on data. And it went on and on and on. Don't worry. Everybody's going to get off here because these guys brought their universities millions and millions and millions of dollars. They'll get their hands slapped and say, please don't use such bad manners in your emails. You think they're going anywhere? No, not in these days and times. Anyway, here's one of my favorites then. Oh, by the way, let me back up here. Okay, you can read that and laugh. The bottom line, as the FOIAs went back and forth, was that they then a guy by the name of McIntyre from Canada requested more data from East Anglia, the raw data. And Jones wrote back, we have proprietary agreements with the countries that gave us the data. Okay, fine. So then another FOIA went. Can you show us the proprietary agreements? Yeah, they did, with 6 tiny countries, plus France. French don't like to give up their data for reasons I don't know. Maybe it has to do with how much water is used for showers. That affects the hydrology or something like that. But anyway, and then finally East Anglia fessed up and said, in the mid-1950s, due to computer storage limitations, we destroyed the data. They didn't quite use the word destroy, but it's like it's not here. And we only have, quote, value-added homogenized data, end quote. So what you see is value-added and homogenized. I'm surprised it wasn't pasteurized. At any rate, that prompted me to write an op-ed called The Dog Ate Global Warming, which appeared around the world. And then Ben Santer wrote this email, which is in the Climategate emails, about wanting to beat me up. Now, after this talk, I know that many of you want to also. And so I will offer you that there is a website called the I Want to Beat the Crap Out of Pat Michaels website. And it was remarked very soon after this went up how many members of the Cato softball team signed up immediately. Because I am known to be somewhat aggressive, even at my age. I don't know why. At any rate, I want to finish with something again, because I think there's a real strong take-home lesson here. For you're going to adapt agriculturally. The question is, are we going to adapt? Are we going to survive financially? The cost, I didn't put a cost estimate up because no one knows it. I think it's safe to say it's in the tens of trillions of dollars. By the far, the largest increase in tax in the history of any nation in the world would be required to accomplish it. Now, given the fact that you don't see very much warming, I have a better idea. Many of you have children that are being sent to Kansas State and other places, and many of you are students at Kansas State. It costs you money to send them there. If you weren't spending that money, you probably would, you're going to stick it in a sock in the ground, the last I heard. No, you're not. You're going to invest it. And so what you're going to do when you start investing money is you're going to look at companies that produce better things than their competitors, or produce them more cheaply and produce the same quality. In other words, produce efficient vehicles, let's call cars, efficiently, or produce them with less energy input, which saves them. And people who invest have been doing that for years. Let's just take a look at an example of this. This is the share price through late last month, despite what's happened to Toyota recently, of 3 car companies that I think are worth looking at. Honda Motor, up since 1990 or whenever this is, 600%. Here's Toyota. These people produce efficient cars efficiently. This is Ford down here. It's upticked a little bit recently. The graph used to have General Motors on it. Not very funny if you held their stock or bonds, let me tell you. And I'll bet there are a few families in here who did. That's off the chart. So what happens, you see, in a vibrant economy are several things. One, people invest in what they think is going to be successful. Some of them make terrible mistakes. And it's very clear from this behavior here that the relative price of the people that produce, the shares of companies that produce efficient products are going up. So you're making money. Some of you got sent to school on Honda and Toyota stock. Did you know that? It's because your parents saw it. Okay, now I take the money away from you. Instead, we give it to the government in the form of an energy tax. What does the government give back to you? A Chevrolet Volt. You know what the range of the Volt is on its batteries only? You've been told it's 70 miles. It's closer to 25 in the real world. Batteries don't do well under certain stresses. It may be 40 on a good day. I have this from GM Engineers, that it's not 70 miles. And then the internal combustion engine kicks in. Good. So does it work like a Prius, where the internal combustion engine splits power between driving the wheels directly and charging up the battery to run the electric motor? No, it's a dedicated generator. Does not drive the wheels. Think about that. Yeah, I just heard the Jesuses in the audience, and it's not because somebody just got religion. You have a vehicle producing electricity to power batteries, so you have a double efficiency drop. And I said, oh, that's kind of interesting. And I was speaking with this engineer, and he said, well, you know, we lose a lot of efficiency when the engine changes its RPMs. I said, oh, yeah, that's true. And by the way, how big is the engine? 2.3 liters. You read all this stuff about a small internal combustion engine? That's not a small internal combustion engine. And this car is loaded down with pretty heavy batteries. No, but you see, the way it's going to save energy, now I think this is what he told me, okay? It sounds so absurd, it could have been a mistake. But he said, we're going to run it at constant RPM. I said, oh, really? He said, it will vary based upon some of the stresses, but it'll tend to run at constant RPM. I said, what? 4,900. You want to guess the fuel economy of this vehicle? in the real world, they're going to advertise 100 plus in its battery phase, given the fact that the power that it draws actually was from the combustion of fossil fuel. Don't worry about that. Anyway, I think you get the picture. If you want a cleaner world, if you want more people to eat, first of all, you don't put in goofy policies like where you burn up your food supply. Number two, you don't put in taxes and cap and trade that will not do anything about global warming. Instead, you allow people to invest in the future. Another thing happens. Ted touched upon. You know what happens when people get rich? They stop having kids. The richer you are, the fewer children you have. That's one of the things that's been demographic transition that's been known around the world, and that's one of the things that drives that inflection in the rate of population growth. So you accomplish everything by allowing economies and people to be free. On the other hand, you could go in this direction right here, which is the result of cap and trade. At any rate, thank you for your time. I want to tell you, I very much enjoyed this. This is the title of my previous book, and a lot of books are sold by their titles. Unfortunately, I work for a quote, intellectual organization in Washington, D.C., and I proposed a different title for this book because, after all, it's a book about storms. It's a book where there's high rhetoric on global warming. There's a lot of volume, etc. And I know it would have been on the top 10 list instead of the top 100 if it had gotten its real title, but it never did. Anyway, thank you for your time and for your attention.
Okay, we do have some time for some questions, so I would ask you to start, and let's see. Let's start up here on the left.
Yes.
Is there any way you can talk briefly about the percentage of methane gas that's actually produced by livestock producers, as well as the EPA livestock tax?
I don't have the exact numbers on me, but the fact of the matter is that in New Zealand, as you probably know, there is a livestock tax already in there for methane. I think your point of attack is that your science is so bad that every one of you said in 1990 the methane concentrations would continue to increase at the rate they were increasing at, and they stopped, and they're actually going down. So how can you tax me on this? And in fact, in the filing that I worked on to get EPA to reduce its proposed endangerment, I made that argument. I don't have the exact number in my head. I could get it for you in a few minutes. Do you know it?
Why are they going after us as livestock producers? The numbers like the methane gas produced by livestock producers here in the United States is 1.2%. Those produced from big producers are 0.8 to 0.8%. Why is the EPA so stringent? Why are they going after us as livestock producers? Why don't they go after some other entity?
I don't know whether those 1.2 or 1.8% are a percent of the total methane flux in the atmosphere.
No, produced by livestock producers.
No, you say 1.8% of the total flux into the atmosphere comes from livestock producers, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know whether that's a statement of imbalance. In other words, that there is a natural flux of methane which should hold the atmospheric concentration constant, and that they believe this is what's kicking it up. Or it's the absolute number. Whatever it is, the entree point to the argument is you tell me the science is settled. You want to make my cow belly up, and methane concentrations have been going down. Please, and by the way, you can win that in court. That is a winner if you try it. Never heard of him.
Personally, I think there's more flatulence in Washington than all the towns put together.
Do you know the urban heat island in Washington, the one I was telling you about, is worse than elsewhere because of the waste heat from all the money changing hands? and also the bodies bumping into each other in very odd combinations. Yeah.
Is there
I will try this. To get heard, whether you like it or not, requires lobbyists in Washington. You know what happens when lobbyists are in Washington too long? They want what's called a seat at the table. And so they say they're going to cut deals. Make sure you watch your people that you send there very, very carefully. And that means the organizations to which you contribute. That's really where the muscle is in D.C. As far as on the internet, you know it would scare the heck out of the Washington lobbyists that are having a seat at the table and eating your lunch? If you started your own organization, think about it.
Is there any monitoring of how much crap that the government puts in our atmosphere with their space programs? They poke more holes in the atmosphere than we do.
Actually, there are, but I think the biggest one that really gets my cork now is that they're viewing global warming as a strategic defense issue. So when the Defense Department gets into it, you know it's a cash cow, pardon the expression. Yes?
You used to hear a lot about the ozone layer and problems that you don't hear much about that anymore.
No, for several reasons. The question is, what about the ozone? The question would be, what about the ozone hole? And I would say there is no ozone hole. There's a late winter ozone depletion that occurs in the high southern latitudes. It was decided that that was a result of chlorofluorocarbons going in the atmosphere. Those are refrigerants that dissociate in the stratosphere, and the chlorine catalyzes the destruction of ozone in the presence of rising sun and something called a polar stratospheric cloud. And I will offer you the following. Let's say that's true. There are large volcanoes that will inject large amounts of chlorine, bromine, etc., into the stratosphere, but they're sporadic. And if the stratosphere was colder than it is now, as it probably was when the CO2 concentration was higher, which was for 98% of the last 100 million years, every time a volcano went off, there was an ozone hole for a few years until the chlorine dissipated out. So what we did is we institutionalized something that was a random process with chlorofluorocarbons, and it was decided that we wanted to get rid of those. Having gotten rid of them, the stratospheric ozone depletion in late spring has stabilized. It hasn't really dropped very much, but it's stabilized, and the chlorine concentration has begun to drop a little bit. So but that's a minor problem. You see, that's a refrigerant. Okay, we went to it because we used to use ammonia. You're old enough to remember ammonia as a refrigerant. What happened? It blew up. People died. So we have substitute refrigerants. Carbon dioxide is the meta-respiration of our civilization, I hate to tell you. And it's a little bit different to try and stop a refrigerant than it is to put a chokehold on your economic respiration. Yes, sir.
Here in Washington,
Ugh.
what's your blueprint for what we can do to combat this whole situation? I mean, what do you think is the most effective thing?
Make noise. To make noise, to combat the situation. Look, politicians are incredibly scared of the greenies. How many hyper-greenies do you know? Not many. But yet they are, pardon the expression, buffaloed. There are more of you than there are of them. So, yeah. Yeah, otherwise we'd all be eating rice and beans. Anyway, my point is that you should organize, and if with the organizations you have in Washington working for you on this, tell them. You understand what the purpose of ethanol was. It was to buy off the farm lobby. You know that. It was divide and conquer. So you need to stand up for yourself. Want to do one more?
One more.
Yes.
How recipient, how do you feel that the status quo of Capitol Hill is as far as
Towards this? They hate facts. They're inconvenient truths. Right now, with regard to global warming, the political process thrives in a data-free environment. However, I assure you that the people are aware of this. It struck me as a rather reassuring fact that a couple weeks ago, the Monday night viewership for CNN was 84,000. That's probably as much as for the local television station here at 6 p.m. So people are just beginning to object to this seriously. And the more you hammer them with the facts, the more paranoid they get. Just keep on saying it, and the louder you are, the more you hear it, the scareder they get. Now, the other thing is, right now, finish off. They have 10 ears. It is Oz in Washington, in the following sense: I have never ever seen the politics of suicide, where people will vote for things that they know will cost them their election. And you got to wonder how happy the freshman congressmen from swing districts are, or a number of senators that are up. I will give you an example of how horrible things have become there to be a Democrat. When's the last time you heard a senator praise Harry Reid, the majority leader? When's the last time you heard that? So these people who are being whipped into political suicide aren't happy. And I find it very hard to believe, A, that they will vote for a substantial health care thing. They might. But after health care, if they're going to vote for cap and trade, you might as well send that Hillenbarger casket company around.